to your Tango week, honey.
Oh,
How has it been?
the Tango week has flown by, and I can't think of too many memorable things about Tango this week
What?
for some reason.
Oh, it's because
Maybe because
are you including San Diego with that?
Oh my God, San Diego happened, but San Diego is not this week. San Diego was the week
End of last
the
week.
week. Yeah, it's like so. This week it's been
Post Tango Marathon blues.
It's been a lot of recovery, but also at the time of this recording, we're getting ready to welcome Horacio Godoy to Los Angeles for the first time. And I'm so excited about that. So I think my mind is sort of focused on the future a little bit. I've even been thinking about this in terms of my own body. And since we're talking about injuries today, I was thinking, okay, I have Horacio's coming and there's going to be 5 days of like a lot of dancing, a lot of workshops. So I got to like save my energy this week and sort of prepare and get as much sleep as I can because
Creatine's been loaded.
Creatine and supplements. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I think about
For when you need the last back saccata. When you're at failure and there's just one more the creatine, that's when it kicks in.
That's it. Otherwise, that back saccata is out of reach.
Yeah, you need those extra phosphates.
That's right. So how has your Tango week been? Post festival blues.
I probably danced. I did dance more than I thought I was going to because
you danced a lot.
I thought by the time we were in the car driving back, I was spent. And I ended up dancing during the week a little bit, did a really quick, just went out, got 3 dances. So that was my Tango week.
Yeah. So,
and gearing up for next week, I am actually going to do some of those workshops.
Right.
With you as well.
How do you feel in your body?
Pretty good. My yoga studio closed.
Oh, so disappointing.
Now it's kind of back to, watching the videos and doing yoga. And it's just easier to get it done when there's a set schedule that you have to jump on. When I have the flexibility to do it in the morning or the evening when I'm here, sometimes other things come up. So I haven't been doing as much yoga. I haven't felt it have a negative impact on my body yet, but I am thinking about the specter of little aches and pains that might result from dancing too much and not spending the time with yoga.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is the first thing that starts hurting for you from dancing? If and this is the case where you haven't taken care of your body, you haven't done any yoga, maybe you're underslept a little bit, and then you go dancing. What's the first thing that starts hurting?
Upper back.
Yeah. And you lead mostly, you feel it from leading.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think upper back and lower back are some of the most common complaints I hear from leaders specifically.
Yeah.
At the beginning, when you first started dancing, how long was it until you started feeling this kind of pain? So you're talking about this upper body. Was that something that you started feeling right away when you started dancing tango?
No, actually, for most of my late 20s and 30s, I wouldn't really think very much about pain from tango. It wasn't too much of a problem. I mean, sometimes my feet would hurt.
So the feet were first.
A long time.
Yeah.
That was mostly just not being able to find a good pair of shoes. So my feet would start to hurt. And that's usually what would just stop me. I don't know if it would stop me, but, I would know, okay, I've had my fill. I can go home. If my feet start to hurt a little bit. Also easy to just power through that. But that wouldn't really have a lasting effect. The next day, I wouldn't be complaining about how my feet felt. It was probably more into my 30s.
But how long were you dancing by that point when it started hurting?
Oh, probably about 10 years.
About 10 years, yeah. It seems like when you first start dancing, you don't necessarily feel a lot of things. It doesn't really affect you in a long-lasting way. The feet, for sure. And I think as a follower starting out dancing in heels, there was a particular aspect to tango that was very, very much about pain and almost like
no pain, no gain.
Yeah, and almost like your level as a dancer, your worth as a dancer was measured by the amount of pain you could sustain. Like, who was still dancing in heels at 5 a.m.? Like, that was, I wanted to be one of those people. And at that time, like, the feet hurt so bad, and you just have to, like, take it. And somehow you do. I mean, I remember many, many nights that I would finish dancing at 6 a.m. and then I would walk 30 minutes home from the milonga, and my feet would feel like knives are going through my feet on every step. It would just feel like the most intense pain. And then I would go home, sleep, get up the next day, and just do it all over again. And the feet it didn't last.
Yeah, the feet are resilient, and they have to be.
Well, for the first 10 years. But after 10 years, I feel like, and I'd be curious to hear from our listeners who have been dancing for a while and you have your own little aches and pains you deal with, like, how long was it until you started realizing, like, okay, tango's taking a toll on my body? And for me, it was maybe not at 10 years. I think I started feeling things maybe about 7 years into it. And as a follower, I got to say, my upper back. So it's interesting. Yeah, but for a different reason. And it's very fascinating to me to think about tango in those terms, like, where is the wear and tear in the structure? Because it's lopsided. It's not symmetrical. And for leaders, I think it's the demand of the follower kind of hanging off of them, right? So you have to be this structure that holds up a weight. But for followers, I think what happens is the embrace of the leader around that part of the ribs, with the closed side of the embrace. And different leaders do different things with that arm. And especially in milonguero embrace, where you are kind of snug, it sort of forces even more asymmetry in your steps on one side versus the other. And so I noticed over time, there was a particular place in my upper back on the left side that would hurt every time I did a back step. And it got worse over time. So I had to, like, go back to the drawing board and sort of understand what was happening. It was in the same place anatomically for me, but not for the same reason. And so for me, to this day, like, I don't have pain in my upper back when I dance. But after I'm done dancing, even maybe the next day, a lot of times I'll feel like these interesting spots of tension and soreness that are in those places where the original wear and tear happened. And, that's just something that's part of my tango life. Like, it's not something I register as a limitation or pain necessarily. It's more like, okay, I just need to make sure I deal with it, right?
Where do you experience different pain as a result of leading versus following?
Yeah, I would say so.
What muscle groups or locations would you say you experience pain in as a leader versus as a follower?
These days as a leader, I'll actually go with the follower first, because the follower one has been more obvious. I've developed a little bit of, like, plantar fasciitis on my left foot. And when I follow, that's when it is more likely to flare up. And it happens because as a follower, you have to pivot so much on the left foot. It's so, I don't know if it's more than on the right foot,
because
but
the left foot is the closed, embraced foot for the follower. The closed side.
Yeah, but I think the reason is that, and I don't want to get in too much of the description of the step because it's hard to visualize for a lot of people. But anytime the follower has to take a forward step in front of the leader to go around them, right? So imagine I'm twisting my body, I'm stepping forward with my left foot, and I'm going to pivot into a side step.
Yeah.
That step is just it's just something you do over and over and over and over again. And it's always slightly at a different angle depending on the lead. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you overstep a little bit. So there's a little bit of extra, I think, work on that left foot. And then a lot of the, boleos or like the leader might want you to stay on that foot for a while for the length of the note in the music or something. So you end up on the left foot a lot, I noticed. So over the years, as I follow, my left foot is the one that starts speaking first to me.
As you describe it, because it is hard to visualize, but if I imagine a floor and walking around the floor, I could see how a particular step with the left foot or the right foot is going to be more common for the follower than the leader, because you typically turn into the center of the ronda as opposed to turning out because you're blind as the leader on your right side. So you're not going to do that as much. So I can see what you mean when you say the follower is going to take a step with their left foot and is going to need to pivot to their side step as they continue turning.
Right.
Direction.
That's an interesting part of the dance that we don't think about, because I've recently been coming back to this basic idea of social tangos, that your goal is to stay in the line of dance, and everything that you do needs to sort of serve that purpose in a social context when you're social dancing. And so you are going to dominate in certain movements more than others. Mm-hmm. You can't be symmetrical because
that's where injuries happen.
Yeah.
When you're doing something that's very asymmetrical.
Over and over again.
Right. Even if your mechanics are good.
Yeah.
It's really hard to, if you can just do a squat properly, but you're even on your left and your right side as you do a squat, if you're, keeping your back from coming out of its arc, you could probably do okay. But then imagine doing like lifting strange objects or asymmetric objects where like you're not just putting a weight above yourself. That increases the complexity of the levers and the pulleys that are your musculature. And that's where you're going to probably maybe overlook some aspect.
Yeah, because it doesn't. It doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal the first few million times you do it.
Right.
And actually, when I was teaching yoga, a lot of the students who came to me ended up working with me on injuries that they had accumulated over the years. It was very rare for me to work with someone who just was recovering from surgery, because it's like the injury you get from working at the computer after 15 years sitting at a desk. Like the injuries you'll develop from that are so much more complex because it's very small increments of tension and misalignment over long periods of time. And you just don't know that it's happening. Mm-hmm. So with tango, I wasn't aware. Mm-hmm. My technique was incorrect in certain ways. Yeah. Because from the outside, it looked correct. But, internally, I started realizing I was not aligning correctly to prevent certain things from hurting,
Yeah. It's unfortunate for young people in tango, because if they only knew they could start working on these things, it's probably easier for somebody who's in their 40s or 50s to think, hey, at the end of the day, I just noticed that I've got a little bit of a crick in my neck because my monitor happens to be located down here to the left. And if I'm all day kind of doing this, it's going to have an effect. Or if, the way I interact with my mouse, it creates some kind of strain. These things might manifest over the course of a day, and they're very small. Go out to a milonga where you're doing, bigger steps. You've got the weight of another person's body to handle too. Yeah, even after 2 or 3 hours, small little things that you're doing posturally that aren't maybe the best setup can really have a detrimental effect on how you feel.
Yeah, totally. And
it's easier for older people to kind of recognize that and try to correct for it. Whereas when you're young, you just fight through it. It's like, hey,
yeah, I know.
it's drink number 4, but I'm just going to fight through it.
You know,
the 5th one.
This makes me think of this guy I know in Tango, and we danced in the same community for many years. So I've known him for many, many years. And I remember at one point I saw him after a while of not seeing him for a long time. And I was like, where have you been? And he's like, oh, I had a disc burst in my lower back. And this guy's like, oh, I don't know. He's at this point in his late 20s.
Wow. And
so in his lower back, his disc, it was, for a disc to burst, it first has to be bulging, right? So, and then when it bulges, it creates pain in the sciatic nerve and all that. So you have all of that happen before the disc actually bursts. Mm-hmm. So for him at his age to have a burst disc, like that's an indication of such poor posture, right? So then I keep seeing him, after some time, and he healed up and he started dancing again, and he's fine now, but a lot of times I ask him about his lower back and he's like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. I was like, do you do yoga or anything? He's like, no. I'm like, wow, like those kinds of things, they're huge when they happen in the body, and they're big signals. Mm-hmm. So Tango, I've known people who had a burst disc in their neck. Mm. And this was like from a follower who had a bad habit of pushing her head forward. Mm-hmm. And so, we were supposed to have a session, and she messages me like the day of the session. She's like, I just had a herniated disc and I can't go in. And so it's pretty rough.
Was the gentleman that you knew, was his injury the result of Tango, or do you know what
it definitely was? Tango did not help. It was related to Tango. He was doing some other things, and
what I'm getting is that there probably should be a Surgeon General's warning about the addictiveness
of Tango
and the dangers of Tango, because you keep reaching for it. You know it's bad for you.
Yeah, it's. I think my insight over the years is it can be avoided for sure. And I think nowadays I've noticed, like, for example, something I appreciate feeling more acutely, like that's maybe the benefit of having these aches and pains, is then you actually feel the relief of them when you practice.
100%.
Right? Because before I would do yoga and I'm like, I felt fine before yoga, I feel fine now. Like there's no difference. But now that my body is a bit more aged, it's like, oh, I do feel the difference. So for me, one of the things I noticed is doing twists the next day after I dance is some of the most therapeutic action I can do on my body. And that's the first thing I feel after dancing a lot, is that I really feel how asymmetrical my spine is. Like my body is slightly turned. One side of my neck is a little tighter than the other. And that's when doing like reclining twist of some kind feels like, oh my God, that's just like the best thing in the world.
100%. When you asked me where it hurts, I probably should have just answered in the form of, what's the thing I want to do to relieve that pain? Mm-hmm. Upper body, like what is that? Even myself, I don't know if I could point to exactly where that pain might manifest, but I know that what I always try to do after a Milonga is a thread the needle pose,
yeah, which is a twist.
Because that's what feels most relieving. That's what feels tight. Mm-hmm. That's where I feel tightness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny how we are, because you always want to stretch right after dancing. And I never want to do that because right after I dance, my body feels sort of alarmed. That's the only way I can describe it. Like for some reason, there's just too much stimulus already. There's too much energy, and I don't want to like stretch into that. I want everything to kind of cool down and reset. Yeah, I just want to like lie down and not feel.
Tango is your yoga.
No, I mean in this way of like that I need to be inactive completely before I start moving again. Like I really feel that I crave that. It doesn't feel good to like do yoga right after dancing.
It's not that you're just tired and you just want to go to bed.
Yes, that's what I'm calling. I want to be just still and not move. That's exactly it. But even if it's like a daytime, like let's say it's daytime milonga that we go to and we get done, typically I'm not going to want to just get down on the floor and stretch. Whereas you would. It seems like for you, it helps. I want to take a nap. I want to just like chill. Then I'll get up and I'll do some yoga. Gotcha. So
what about injuries that aren't necessarily musculoskeletal? Or is that what also we would be talking about today?
Like, what kind of injuries are you referring to?
Yeah. I was thinking just,
injuries to your ego?
Like I'm not ready to talk about this.
Okay, too much. That'll be part 2.
Bumps, like little fender benders on the dance floor, heels, bruises.
Yeah. Let's actually go over some of the most common injuries like that I see. And well, there might only be one that's like very relevant to point out, and that's women.
The heel.
Yeah, women getting their toes torn off. I mean, that happens a lot.
What do you? Unfortunately, I've never.
You've never experienced that
shoes.
Yeah,
and even if I've gotten my feet stepped on, it hasn't.
Yeah, you've never had a toenail torn off.
I don't think so. No,
I have.
Yeah,
I have.
I mean, it sounds. I think they use that as an implement of torture. Toenail play.
Yeah. No, it's rough. And I just. Really, in the last month, maybe 3 people messaged me about that. Or, I saw posts of somebody posting their picture of their foot, their bleeding foot. And I'm like, oh, too much. I get it. So that happens.
How long do you take off if something like that happens?
Well, okay, so here's what happened for one of my students recently that I had a private with. She almost canceled because she was like, oh, I have, my toenail was partially torn off. And I don't know if I can dance. So she almost canceled, but then somebody told her to go to one of the nail parlors and have them take it off. And she was sort of like, I don't know, maybe I need to go to like a doctor and have that done. But she ended up doing that, and it totally worked.
Really?
So they took off the nail, and
Do we have to put a disclaimer on this episode? I know. To seek medical advice. We are not doctors.
I know. I'm not a doctor. This is what she did. But then, she came to the session and her foot was bandaged. But most of the time, I've noticed that the people who get their nails torn off are also the people who are just going to keep dancing. I've had like blood drawn from a heel. And there's never a time that I stopped dancing because of it, but it's pretty painful.
Yeah.
Have you ever had your foot stepped on by a heel?
I don't think so. But like nothing lucky. Sticks out in my mind.
Yeah,
nothing.
Men don't experience those kinds of things. Yeah. Unless you wear heels a lot, which...
Would you say that for the average tanguera or they spend enough time resting and recovering from their injuries?
Before dancing again? Absolutely not. No. Yeah. I mean... Festivals and marathons is like an example of that in practice. Like let's just run our bodies into the ground willingly and celebrate that.
Some kind of pride. Yeah, it's sort of some sort of mark that. Yeah. As you said, you wanted to be the person out there at 4 a.m.
Yeah, and there's there's some sort of pride in that, or even pleasure of like. Sustaining that much
because
suffering.
Tango is pain?
Yeah, it's pain, love and hatred.
Love and hate. It's all things.
It's everything. So I wanted to go through and list things that are the most common injuries that happen in tango and pitch in when you kind of think of some for leaders, because I'm sort of thinking about my own experience and then the students I've worked with and what they've complained about. And then I want to talk about what we actively do now to take care of our bodies. Because I think I hear a lot of questions. People ask me a lot of for advice about what to do in terms of unwinding from tango or training for tango, conditioning for tango. So we've already talked about the feet. The feet are probably the first thing that people start feeling pain. And that can be from bad technique at first. We just don't know. Like for people who don't know the proper technique for pivoting, or they're more pronated in their feet, or, different things like that can create plantar fasciitis type of symptoms, different kind of inflammation and pain, but also shoes. And you pointed to that, right? That getting a good pair of shoes is super important, and your feet can hurt just if you don't have the right shoes.
Yeah.
And for me also, I noticed when I first started dancing tango, I took just a pair of heels that I got from Nordstrom Rack and went to a milonga, and I was dancing in these shoes for a little bit, maybe a month or so, and I started feeling a lot of pain on my outer leg, like where the IT band was. And luckily I figured it out. What was happening was that my shoe was a little sticky. It was not letting me pivot my whole leg at once. So it was like my foot would just get a little stuck for a minute and the upper leg would go ahead and twist.
Right.
And doing that over and over again, I started feeling this radiating pain on one side. So again, that can be like a big contributor to other types of pain.
Start
shoes.
From the ground up. Below the dance floor, is there space, right? Is it a dance
cushion?
Floor that has some that's
you mean is it sprung floor,
right,
or is it concrete
versus tile versus wood, like all of those things, like as you go from hard densities to softer materials, that's going to decrease, or as you go to softer, you can probably dance more without injury, but the harder it is, the more injury, the less pivot is allowed, the more your feet are going to hurt. So if you're dancing at an outdoor milonga on, some kind of
gravel
that doesn't really sand, these sorts of things, your injury probability starts to creep up, and those things will, maybe start in your feet, your calves, your joints, and then all the way up to your head. The things you start doing with your head in terms of like where that balance is, it's going to start sending pain down through the rest of your body too.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
If your head is forward, then you're cantilevered about your midsection,
right?
And it's going to start to strain your back muscles, and it might strain your neck.
Yeah, exactly. Well. So, and those are basically, that's how you can kind of see structurally where the injuries are going to be happening mostly. So the feet are the first place, the knees. For leaders, actually, that's what I hear a lot, is the knee pain. And that really has to do with how you're stepping, how you're aligning your feet and hips when you're stepping around your followers. Then from there, it's the lower back, right? Lower back, very common for people to feel discomfort, pain, sciatica. Like sciatica can flare up for people from dancing tango because of that. Then from there, it's the mid-back, right? That right around that point where you have that shift between the lower dotic curve of the spine that goes one way to the kyphotic curve of the upper spine. So it's like an S. And where that S starts changing direction, that place is so prone to tension and pain. And then from there, it's the neck and shoulders. And I would say for leaders, the shoulders a lot of times can become an issue, shoulders and neck, because of the tension.
Yeah. I definitely pull up my shoulders and see that in beginners too. You got nerves, you sort of like start to go up, whereas everybody always tells you to ground yourself, right? Go down. But people tend to want to lift their shoulders up, and that's a lot of strain. With
exactly.
Hours of dancing on top.
Exactly. So those are going to be the main areas where injuries are prone. And I've probably experienced a little bit of everything except for knees. Like I've never had any knee issues, thank God. Although I did have a knee injury like way, way back. So I kind of dealt with that before. But everything else I've sort of had like little flare-ups here and there, even, with my lower back and stuff. And what I found that for me, what's really important is that on a daily basis, there's a set of movements that I make sure I always do, whether I dance or not. And that's just kind of like my maintenance. So that's where my yoga practice comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you started yoga since we got together. So you didn't used to do yoga before. And how, like now that you've been doing it for a while, like what do you think is the most important aspect of what yoga has contributed to your health? Like how is it different from before?
A structural knowledge, just to think of the body as a structure and understand a logic to that structure, even if I don't know the specific connection points for the QL muscle. I kind of know a little bit about where that is, what movements create stretch in that particular part of the body and what creates contraction. And to be able to then think, my mind's eye, as I move through a physical pose, that knowledge at least gives me some kind of control of it, right? And so I can kind of recognize a thing first, where it manifests in the body, and then do something to try to alleviate or relieve it in a very imprecise way, but
intuitive way,
in a purposeful way nonetheless.
Yeah. And I remember before you got into yoga, you did have some back issues that were pretty severe at some points. You were very troubled by it.
Yeah. I mean, I eventually, I would get a physical every year and kind of had to, in this questionnaire, like acknowledge that the pain was bad enough that it was causing issues in my life, that I was socially more isolated. I wasn't going out anymore to dance. And so tango really actually was a good way to understand that this was significant, that this was not getting better. It wasn't going away. It had to be addressed because it was having a significantly negative impact on my life. Yeah.
So then, do you still have that pain? Do you feel like it's there and you're managing it? Or do you feel like it's something that you just kind of got over completely and it's not an issue
in some
anymore?
ways, I do think of it as I've gotten over it. It's always kind of lingering there. It was sort of, I was fortunate in that way to develop a relationship to pain and my body at, I think, was a fairly young age. That's all relative, but I'm glad to have gone through the experience because I think it makes me more aware now of the things I need to do to be preventative.
Yeah.
In terms of things that would cause pain.
Yeah. I mean, I got into yoga because of a back injury, lower back, and I had sciatica when I was 21. And I also felt like I got over that injury pretty fully, I would say. But definitely lower back is something that I go to first when I'm thinking about like releasing my body. Like if I think of like, okay, I just need to get down on the floor and relax and stretch, the first thing I'm going to stretch is my lower back. And it does feel like whenever I do go through some sort of period of stress or a lot of travel where I can't do a lot of yoga and I'm not able to really have the time to myself, then the lower back is the place where it's going to show. And some of that sciatica pain, it doesn't necessarily come back all the way, but I can just sort of feel the possibility of it. Like I can just tell my body is sort of like gearing up for that pain, and I immediately can do something to respond to it. And it's really nice to have that toolbox available so that it's not like, oh my God, here it is. I need to go to the doctor. I need to take pain medication. Exactly. Exactly. So in terms of what we do, we have very different practices, I think, the way we approach our body care. The way I think of my practice when I approach this idea of like, okay, I just need my body overall to reset and get back to my normal state of equilibrium. I follow this formula that I heard a teacher once say is forward bend, back bend, twist. That's pretty much it. Forward, back bend, twist. So whatever shape that takes is up to you. And as long as I get those movements in, so if I imagine that I'm just trying to get my spine to go back and forward a few times, maybe side to side, and I'm trying to wring it out and twist it. Okay, so that part is done. Mm-hmm. And then the second part is the legs, of course, and the legs, 100% of the time, the first thing you got to stretch is the hamstrings, because ultimately, especially when you're dancing tango, it's the hamstrings that are really working to hold you because you're slightly leaning, right? Mm-hmm. So the weight of your spine, that's the legs, the way they're supporting
you're slightly leaning forward, right. So you can imagine the hamstrings, which are on the back side of your body,
exactly,
are tensing up to keep you from falling forward.
So those two, it's always in my mind, like just to get the spine reaching in different directions and get the joints to move in their full range of motion.
Yeah.
And then stretch out the legs. And that typically, the bare bones of that can take about 10 minutes for me. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm ready to go. Mm-hmm. What is that for you? That kind of like when you get to the mat, you're like, I just need the bare minimum. What is that for you right now?
Thread the needle.
Thread the needle.
And down dog for the hamstrings.
Yeah.
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 That would be the minimum. If I did that, I'd be solid.
As extensive as the injuries can get in tango, their prevention and keeping them at bay actually doesn't take very much of your energy if you're doing it on a consistent basis. And I think people think of resetting their body or relaxing their body as a workout experience. Like, so they'll treat going to the gym as that sort of reset. And to me, it's like, no, working at the gym is something, working out is like a different activity that's a stress on your body. If you just take 5 to 10 minutes and do some more of these passive, breath-oriented movements that are a little bit more about actual release, that can really make a profound difference down the line, because it's kind of amazing what it does now.
And we all want to be dancing longer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I think about is however I'm doing it now, I have to be able to do it into my 90s or however long I end up living. Like, I want to be able to keep doing it at the rate that I'm doing it, which means I want to be able to go for a full event for 4 days and dance every night because I want to, and I don't have to stop because I'm in pain or there's something wrong that I can't move very well, right? Like, I want to have that. And that's something that has to be built into the dance practice. And maybe I have this, maybe the Olympics has like inspired me to a new level, because I really do think of tango as like a sport, as an athletic activity that you just need to condition yourself for to be able to do it for longer. So yeah, it's a lot of what I think about as a dancer, and when I choose what I wear, when I dance, how I move, how much effort I put into anything. It comes from this place of like, okay, the function has to be there in order for the form to be there. Like, I have to, that saying, form follows function. Which is an architectural idea, right? Okay. But I think of it for tango, I've thought about, is it form follows function, or is it function follows form, right? Which one dictates? Do you sacrifice your function, your ability, your natural range of motion for the satisfaction of aesthetic form and aesthetic perfection? Right? Which a lot of dancers do that. We see that in ballet all the time. Ballet dancers do that. They can't dance past age 30, right? Or maybe 35. So I think as a social dancer, I've kind of arrived for my own personal philosophy. It's like, no, function trumps form to me. The form needs to follow the function. The function is, this is how my body moves naturally. This is what is least impact. This is what's most elegant and graceful without me moving with a lot of effort. And so that's what I'm going to prioritize over the aesthetic perfection, because the aesthetic perfection is not available forever. Whereas I think the function, you really can dance into old age. You know, you see those dancers in Buenos Aires who are in their 90s and they're still dancing. And, you know, I definitely want to be one of those. Well, I'm excited to hear from our listeners, perhaps, about their practice. If you would like to share some of your insights and revelations you've made about your dance and what helps you stay healthy and take care of your body, go ahead and pop it into the comments. You can also share it through social media at I'm So Tango. And we will, I guess, continue this banter next time.
Right after I poison myself with a little bit more Jameson.
Until next time, y'all. Ciao.